All right, so let's take a look at where I left off. Let's start with some things off of this to-do list that I wrote down yesterday. One of them is just there were some sorting problems going on. Let's see. This is the old one. Sim.c new, please. Parser context. There were some questions about where some of these types would belong. And the types we're looking at are the proto kind, and the literals. So the thing that ends up happening is literals, which is made up of all of this, but also the proto kind. These are a method for pure data representation of the things we parse out of the scripts from the parser. And we then construct literals into protos right here. Now, when we construct protos, we actually handle them by IDs instead of by pointers. That might not actually be something we need to be doing all the time. Maybe we could just use proto pointers everywhere. But the nice thing about having them in IDs is that they're one step closer to being serializable, which might be something we want to do with these before too long. However, there are some unanswered questions about how that would work. So in the meantime, let's try to just put this into a new file. So protos and literals are both used here in the parser. We could put all of the protos in a proto.h before everything else. And then the parser is downstream of proto.h and the context is downstream of proto.h. That seems like the simplest reorganization that I can think of right now. So proto.h is just these. And they go here. Okay. All right, we got the very, very, very basics of a combat system set up last time. I think that's the main place I should spend time. Let's see. Right. So, where do I want to take things? I know this needs to end up as an entity system, so I could just switch over to having some basic entities for characters and parties. Let's do that. So for now, we're going to do it the easy way. So there's a list of children, and then also we'll throw in these from the character. Okay, so we still loop over the array of parties, but then for each party we actually need to do a node loop. And then it's like this, except we don't need to grab a character pointer at the beginning anymore. That part is just automatic. The rest is the same. But a hit is going to need to point at a sim entity now. Then again, for each party, we're going to switch over to a character node loop. We have to figure out if the character is equal to 0, how we want to advance, and then how we advance here will be character equals character next. Oh, this is usually like this, right? Next equals 0. One way or the other, character equals next, next equals character next. So now, erasing one from the set is going to be DLL remove. DLL W linked list, not the dynamic link library. Meaning we're removing it from the W linked list contained by the party node. Sim entities. Okay. So the target is going to be, for now we're going to need RPG sim index other party n. Alright, so something we want to do is start taking notes about problems that the entity system needs to solve. That's what I'm going to do right here. Problems for entity system. Sim entity design. How about that? This is March 10th. Let's see, the fast random indexing of children. This is just the old for loop. Cool. So that's a step towards making an entity system here. What else did I have on my old to-do list? I'm kind of divided here. My notebook ran out of room on my old to-do list, and now I'm making this more detailed one just for the entity system. So let's see, was there anything else in there I want to build towards to build up the entity system? I think the next thing to do, well, I should definitely add logging sooner or later. I think the order here is I need to do logging and then tile effects and then brain scripts in order to get all the features up and running. This one is done. Okay. So logging would go like this. This doesn't have a logging system yet. So, before I can do that, let's talk about folding PRNG into the context, maybe? So when we make a new context, do we just give it a seed for now? Obviously where this needs to land is that the context is like a bundle, so we need to be able to reset the seed. We need to be able to reset from a given seed at some point. But that means we could do this. We'll just reach in and grab it whenever we want it for now. There we go. Now, we can imagine logging like this. We'll just manually write in the visor rule. Because here what we're going to do is we're going to iterate the parties, and the characters, gotta think about that. All right, yeah, we're taking on this is actually a significant set of questions today. Maybe I can go after the printf. Maybe I can go after the printf plugin idea. We'll see. Okay. Something like this, maybe. All right. All right, so there's applying the indent if we just put out a new line. Now what I want to do is emit substring up to new line. So that scans us from wherever we're at up to the point where putter equals a new line character. And then one last step, if putter is less than OPL, we'll add one more so that we actually don't stop on the new line, but stop right after it. So we take everything from first to putter, we copy it, put it there, and stick it on the list. Then we're done if the new line, right. And then if we print anything, the indentation goes first. So if we went up to there, then we'd come around and do the new line. That should do the trick. I want to build, at some point I want to build a much better string streaming type of data structure. The string 8 is not the best way to contain like a log type thing, and I haven't sat down and done that. Let me go look at my project binder and see if I put that in there anywhere for the year. Pluggable printf. Object files, November, December. Okay. Take a quick break from this to make a new project card in my project binder. Test cases. Okay, now to log a character, the reason this needs to be a special thing is because we're gonna print these out using the compressed notation. So num pluses is gonna be entity hearts modulo 5. Wait, that doesn't work because now we have hearts and max hearts. So why don't we just do this? Why don't we do context percent %u out of percent %u. %u. Yeah, that seems fair. Hearts max, strength. Okay. Now we shouldn't need this anymore. Instead, what we're going to do is we're just going to run it with simulation, or with the logging turned on. We'll run the simulation, and then we'll go read log crash. Okay. I think there's a couple things I know I skipped. There's the, yeah, here we go. Okay. when combat ends, I'm gonna log the parties one more time. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that's working. I don't know if that's exactly the most useful layout I could think of. It's a little hard to read. So let's try to think about what we could do here. Maybe we don't need these end points because it's indented anyway. I like that better. Wish the parties were labeled. Maybe this should be like this. Hey, Paging Turner. How are you doing? Okay, and then I think I want to actually just do new lines after every character. Oh, that sucks. Hope that turns out well. So there, the party takes 3 damage. Here they take 1 more. Party 2 is wiped out. Okay. That's good enough for now. I can use that to see what happens if I want to log. If I ever need to see what's happening inside the system, that's a good starting point to be able to do that. Okay. So with logging in place, I'm now going to be able to debug if anything weird is happening. Ooh, here's one where they got wiped out, or they got down to 2. How'd that happen? All 3 hit 1 guy, and they only got them down to 2 at the same time. Yeah, so those 2 strokes of bad luck. These 3 all hit the same guy at the same time. So they're down to 3, but then these 4 only managed to knock out 1 guy and hit 1 other guy. So they a little bit clumped up too much. So there were still 2 of them. They got him down to 1. And then unlucky he hits. Yeah, it's like everything had to work out perfect, but they can get down to 2 Okay. Two, 4, 8, 16. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Tile effects. How do I want to do this? I think how do I want to do it? The problem is that most tiles that I have aren't automatic. They require a brain script to activate them still. I could just set up a tile and have the brain script rule be that it always activates. And then something like I don't know, blast for my old set of tiles would be a good starting point. But that's a little hard to verify that it's working. Um, I guess protect is another easy one, and that one's easy to verify. Okay, so well, I could take a side route here. Instead of starting with effects, I'm going to start with just turning these into tiles, which has always been a part of the goal. So let's try to work on that today. Let's get the simulation running where hearts and the strength are actually just tiles attached to the entity rather than being there. So heart, and we'll call this, I don't know. I need a good word for it at some point, but so there's our two tiles for hearts and damage. And then the next step here is to eliminate it from these and just have those work as counts on these. Okay, so the literal will carry those because it's parsed right out of the thing, right out of the string, which the string language is giving special meaning to those two counters, but then we're going to cast them down. So this level we'll keep them, but then the issue is at this level we need to change them. So these sub IDs, sub count is now going to be that plus the literal hearts plus the literal strength. Fill the hearts, fill the attacks, so now all of these can go. Okay, so we're going to want to count the number of hearts. We're going to want to count the number of the strength by counting that attack tile. And then we're also going to want to figure out how to get a hearts max in here. For now, I'm going to cheat and do that. But this is going to be like, well, yeah, we'll see. do that. Hello? How are you doing? Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Now I need to render out a sim entity that can correspond to the matching character proto. Now there's a couple of funny things about this. I think for now the right thing to do is going to be to loop the character proto's sub IDs. Right? It's going to be like this. We're going to look at character proto sub count, RPG tile increment, context, character proto sub IDs J. 1. Tile deck. Heart ID. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we expect to do this? We haven't actually worked out the data structure yet. So the sim entity has a set of children. I could make a sim entity for each tile that a character contains. Or I could put like a single one down for the type, right? We can be like this, proto ID, and then like counter, and then max. So then the idea would be that the result comes from going, these aren't just entities, these should be characters. find the tile that matches, and then what we want to do is we want to go if tile counter plus amount is greater than or equal to, let's see, counter equals tile counter plus tile plus amount. Tile counter equals clamp top new counter tile max. Break. Same thing again for decrement, except this time we want to be careful if we subtract and it goes below 0. Then that actually means we bottomed out at 0. Could also do this by switching over to signed. That would mean that this is just a clamp bottom 0 new counter 32. Maybe that's the way to do it. Okay, so doesn't work, which is good. That means I have to figure things out now. Let's see how far we got. What happens when we try to render out one of these parties? New party entity. For each character proto, we make a character entity. And then we go in here and we tile increment, but there's no occurrence of the tile at all. Alright, let's see here. This should probably just go like this, and we can go. If tile does not equal 0, we return the counter and the max. Then, in this case, if tile does not equal 0, we do this logic. But if tile does equal 0, then what we're going to do is go, oh wait, hold on. Even better, if tile equals 0, we'll go tile equals RPG entities. Is he living over in combat right now? Yeah. Need to fix that. RPG sim entity new. So let's see, this needs to go onto an arena, but which arena? We'll just throw it onto the context arena because we don't have a real entity system just yet. The parent will be the character. This new tile will have a proto ID like this. The max will just be max U32 since we don't have any other way to do it. Yeah, that should do it. And then when we decrement, what we're going to do is grab a tile. If the tile is not 0, we go ahead and do the decrement. And then if the tile counter reaches 0, we can DLL remove the tile from there completely. Okay, so now the only problem is that the maxes are all wrong. Let's go figure out how we would actually like for that part to work. So what's happening there is that we build one of these parties by constructing the entities. We get the character entity, and then we just increment these one at a time. What we actually want to do is to get from the proto, not the set of proto tile IDs to increment, but rather the initial states to give them. That way we can do something more like go across the sub count, RPG tile, init, context character, sub IDs, character proto, sub counts. Maybe this would be like tile init, or maybe this would be like I don't know, some kind of like proto params or something like that. Params, I'm not sure what it'll be called, but it'd be like this. So you go sub j, and then you go params. Maybe this could be called the sub. The sub ID, the sub count, the sub max, something like that. So this would mean that the protos themselves are encoding counts and maxes and stuff. Now that's not quite what I want either all the time. This is where things start to get weird, because I want to be able to use the tiles in multiple different ways that maybe don't gel together. Let me see. I've been at it for an hour and 20 minutes. I think it'd be a good time for me to take a 5-10 minute break and come back. So I'm going to do that. Let's see here. How do I want to set it up? We'll do set off in forecoder. All right, so let me talk this out a little more. The problem I was talking about is that there's some tiles are going to want to encode a concept of their state, their stack limits or stacking capacities, right? So, for instance, if I make a tile that represents an item in an inventory, then it's going to want to include in its in the fixed definition of that particular tile, that that you can have multiple copies of the tile but that they don't stack, or maybe that they do stack up to 10 or whatever. And other tiles are going to want to say, like, you can't have multiple copies of this tile, you can only have one. And it's hold on, let me make sure everything's working. My Twitch preview was just saying it was reconnecting, but it looks like everything's actually fine. I don't know. And so I haven't actually got a uniform picture of how all these different things work. So the way I had originally designed this got about halfway what I wanted, and it was a little bit finicky though. And that was that I could say that a tile takes up that I could have a couple of flags or options. One was, can you have multiple stacks of this tile or only one? And another option was, what's the max if there is one? And for a single stack. And so between those two combinations, you could get whatever you wanted, right? So like hearts, you never need to have multiple stacks of hearts. It's just a counter. But then you wouldn't want to say what the max hearts is. You just say that there is a max. How many, whatever the max is determined on a character by character basis, right? It's different for each character. It's a variable of its own. So the question is, how do I want to represent the various possibilities and how I want to program them? That's what needs to be worked out. And I'm going to just sort of sit and think and sketch for a little while about how I think that works. One sec. Okay, so let's just map out a couple of different versions here. So the heart tile has a max per character set, which means it needs to be set by the character proto. Let's say, and you don't need no multiple stacking, right? Let's call it potion, healing potion, has a max of 1, Let's see. Now I do want to keep in mind that hearts are special because they come through you're guaranteed they're built into the construction of the character a little bit more deeply. I mean, technically, you could submit some character with 0 hearts. I guess it would immediately erase itself from existence every time you did, given the rules of the game. But there might not be anything else that is like that. I'm not sure. I mean, if there was going to be something else like that, it'd be something like mana, right? So you can imagine that not every character will have mana, but once a character gains mana... Oh, and you know what else is interesting? The max is... Say I had... if I had hearts, and I drop those down to 0, and then I discard the whole stack, that would be... That would be fine, but if you look at something like mana, this is per character. Initially 0, maybe, unless there are some set by character proto. So maybe we could say set by character proto means that you start with all of your stacks full. So then these would be the same. If I have 3 hearts and 2 mana in the character, then we also have... We just set that from the character proto counts, right? The counts give you both the max and the initial state of the thing being full. You also have a single stack of these, but not okay to discard on 0. Not discarded on 0, discarded on 0. And although it's okay to discard the hearts, it would make more sense to not discard them. Okay, think about a poison tile. How do you want that to work? It wouldn't necessarily need a max, although if you were going to have a max, it would be like maybe there's always a default max. So this could just be max in from max default whatever, single stack, and discarded on 0. Right? So you can have a single stack of these. It doesn't make sense to have multiple stacks of this. Let's talk about an arrow. If you're going to have a quiver, and you might have a max of 10. Multiple stacks discarded on 0. Okay, so now the part where this gets confusing and weird is what is the rules on these? So anything that has multiple stacks, that generally turns out to be an item. And there's a separate question that I don't have an answer to yet about how I want inventory to actually work. So this whole thing about maxes and stacking of item-like things, you can see there's sort of there's no talk here about inventory max or something like that, or inventory slots. And so that'd be part of the rules. Like, yes, you can have multiple stacks, but each of these stacks takes up a space of inventory or something like that. I don't have any of that encoded into the system very well. The way it worked in the first prototype was that you just kept a counter. You kept a counter of how many items you were allowed to have and how many you did have. And so every time you added one of these tiles, you modified the counter, like you incremented it. You counted how many items you have. And when the number of items you had reached its max, if you tried to add a new item, a new item type tile, if there wasn't already room for it in one of the existing stacks of that item type, then it would fail to add to the character that tile. And that's all like sort of a separate question that I haven't figured out exactly how I want to phrase the logic of that. But for these up here, you can see with this like increment decrement logic I've been doing, I'm trying to get to some kind of story about these being like variables on the character, so that I can do stuff like this, like just adding and subtracting them directly. While also having the ability to attach extra logic. So, for instance, if you have poison, then there's the logic of poison is a little bit of code about, you know, that's attached to the poison tile, so that you can introduce the poison counter and the logic for that type of tile all in one declaration into the system. So the part where this gets weird is it keeps feeling to me like these item things just maybe need to work differently. Like maybe I need to separate tiles and items and just see how things sort out with those being different and not Lego bricked into a single tile type. And the reason I say that is all of these seem like they work just fine, right? You have heart, mana, poison. If you want to add like taunt, max 1, single stack, discard on 0. But there is another feature here. Which is things like taunt. I want to be able to make an ability that you can use. Well, taunt is actually... Yeah, taunt isn't even used like consumable. Let's see, where are we, oh, where do I have the old tiles sitting around? What's a good example? Yeah, blast is a good canonical example. Max 1, single stack, node discard on 0. So this part captures all of that, and we would always be able to go and check, do you have this tile, yes or no, and then if it's and then get its count. So I guess the question is, we want to be able to do these things where we go like character, tile ID, to, and then like tile state, right? That's what we're doing with count and max at least. And the tile state can actually contain more than I'm accounting for. Tile state can contain some of the following answer some of the following questions. Exists, so this is a Boolean, exists. If it exists, then we can say that they always will have a count. We could ask if it has a max, or just say that it always has a max. We could also say, does it have, it is, one sec. We also could ask things like, we want to be able to go from the tile ID to so the max is either statically set by the proto, or it's left up to the character to have that as state. We're going to just mark it like this, variable. Maybe like that. Yes, so max can either be variable, none, or a number. Single stack tile type max, tile type multi-stack. So then if you call on this max thing here, that might sometimes just be giving you a static value from this, but if it's variable, then that's going to depend on the state that we get from this particular character. Count max exists. There's also tile type discard on 0, tile ID boolean. Okay. Just count max. I think that's everything. I think that's everything. I think that covers all the stuff except items. Anything that needs to deal with an inventory system, I need to build on another layer. I need to solve that problem separate. But as far as just a bank of counters goes, this works. Now, okay, all of these though are single stack, and the question is, do I actually want to support multi-stack? The question, once you allow something to be multi-stacked, if it's not restricted by an inventory system, then you can have an infinite number of them. And so the max switches to meaning something different, right? It switches to meaning the stack count, like the maximum number of elements in the stack, but you can have 3 potions if you can store 3 stacks of items. And so the count would then come out as 3 while the max is 1. And so it would no longer make sense to really say that it has a max at all. It would be more appropriate to use different language for it. So maybe we just say, yeah, that tiles and items, we're going to build items in a separate pass later instead of trying to blend them into one thing before we know how. Yeah, okay. So the idea here is that if something is not discarded on 0, it's because of one of two things. If it has a variable maximum, then it can never have discard on 0, because if I have, for instance, the ability to gain larger and larger max mana, then even if my mana depletes, that's not the same thing as losing all of the progress I've made on increasing my maximum. It's not like I should, next time I get 1 mana, like it's not like as soon as I go down to 0, I mean for the whole max to zero out as well, right? So if the max has to stick around, then the stack has to stick around, because that's, it's still 0 out of 5. It still needs to be shown. And the other thing it means is when we're not discarding on 0, even for these ones, it means that the tile still has an effect. A tile has an effect just for being present, no matter what the counter on it means. The counters then are just used to program the effects, like how much damage you're going to take from the poison, or whether or not you've used your blast ability already, and need to like recharge it before you can use it again, that kind of thing. And then I'll have to just say that items need to be solved as a separate kind of ability, separate kind of program in the system. But then things like poison and sleep have the effect that once they're done being applied, they no longer need to be in effect at all. The code for them doesn't need to run. Okay. Okay. If that's the way it's going to work, then let me start from the tile protos. So the tile protos have a name. They also need to have the ability to store a max and a flag for whether or not they discard on 0. That should do it for now. We could just say a max of 0, right? Couldn't we? A max of 0 indicates that the max is variable. It's a little bit of an attractive approach. Yeah. Right, so the other thing I want to figure out now is probably I'll just send down a count and an ID, not a max. And then the init is going to figure out, based on the ID, is going to figure out, you know, these things. Is the maximum variable or not? And if it's variable, it just sets the max from the count. If it's non-variable, it clamps the count, given the static max. So then the point is that we're just passing around an ID and a count instead of an array of IDs. Hello, welcome. How are you doing? So there'll be our subs and subs count. Okay, so init will be a little different from inc. We're going to look up the tile via the proto ID. If the tile does equal 0, then we continue. Otherwise, we're not interested. We create the new tile. And then we're going to set the tiles. I'm using the C language. Set the max from, let's see, in order to get this right, we got to get the proto RPG proto from ID, context proto ID. It's the C programming language. I don't know how to, like, what it's just a programming language. What else could I say? Like, you're gonna have to be more specific about what you're curious about. Proto tile max. If the proto tile max is 0, though, then the max is going to be equal to the amount. And then if the tile max we want to set the tile counter equal to clamp top, the amount, and the tile max. C is just it's a low-level systems language. It's like it's not it's not new. It's like from the 60s and 70s when it was first created, but it's still a pretty decent way to get things done if you know how to use it. Subs. Sub IDs gets replaced with RPG proto subs. RPG proto sub ID subs. Subs index ID, subs index this is going to be 1 for hearts, 1 for strength, and 1 for each member in the member count. I think that's still too many, but it might turn out that the members can now contain counts as well. Dot count equals where's the it's the literal hearts. All right, take care. There we go. Now, when we make a literal member, okay, we got a couple of them. I'm just going to go everywhere and tell them to have a count of 1 everywhere, since that's the same as the way it was interpreted before I added that field. So it's equivalent copy member count equals member count. In this case, we'll just do the copy. All right, let's see. Tile new. Discard on 0, counter max 0. Attack. Discard on 0, counter max 0. Mana. Discard on 0, counter max 0. Discard on 0, counter max. Max U16, I guess. Yeah, I don't like that. Let's make these max out at 99 as the default. Max of 1. Taunt. Max of 1. Fly. Max of 1. Okay. It's interesting that got to the number 1 now. So let's see what happens again right here as we go to construct the party. Whoops. Do you do any testing while doing your projects? Yeah, I'll answer in more detail in a second. Let me keep reading the question. Do you do any testing while doing your projects, and how do you rewrite confidently when you think it's not going well? That is it's a relatable question, but it's a little hard to figure out how I would answer it. Well, first part is yes, I do some testing. Depends on what I'm building. Right, sometimes you're building something like well-defined, like parser for a file format or a particular algorithm. And in those cases, it's possible to do something like testing very neatly, because you'll just have like, okay, you have some way to get the correct answer for some samples. And that might be because you craft them by hand using a technique outside of what the algorithm is capable of, but what you're capable of with your mind. Other times it's you've got a slow version of the algorithm that you don't want to deploy, but that you can use for generating correct answers to test against. Other times it's that you are confident that it was right when you started, and so you keep around a solution to you keep around a copy of the test output from every test you've got from the beginning of the day or from before you started refactoring. That stuff is not as applicable to architecture questions. There's no test for whether or not you made a good API that you can automate, because API design is it's not a well-defined problem to begin with. It's a problem of taste and and vision and uh, sort of creative mindset. What does this API allow you to imagine building, and what does it absolutely prevent you from succeeding at building? Um, those kinds of things come out from very human details. That it's very much about how it works as an interface to the code, right? We call it an application programming interface, but I think it's more than that. It's actually the full. It's like it that makes it sound like it's a machine interface, but it's actually a human interface, right? It's the interface for how you compose the existing code into new code as a human. Um, and so whether or not you like your API isn't something you can test with automation. It's something you have to feel. How do you deal with it when you're doing a rewrite and it doesn't feel like it's going well? I really don't know. When it feels like it's not going well, I try to do one of two things. I try to either look for a spot of sanity, like is there a, it's sort of like halfway through a rewrite when nothing's coming together, it kind of feels like you're in free fall. If you can grab a hold of one thing, like this piece, I can get it working from here, that can be a way to stabilize it. The other thing you can do is just give up and go back to the last thing you had that was working and try again, right? If you have anything that's ever in the history of your project kind of worked, even if it was a rough, problem laden iteration, you've always got that sitting there. So I have many times gotten 3 weeks into rewriting something and then scrapped that, copied back in what I had 3 weeks ago, and tried again. And that sounds like a waste of time, but it actually works. Like if you keep on iterating, sometimes some of those iterations will be steps in the wrong direction, but you, as the programmer, are kind of applying a selective filter to these attempts, right? Some of the attempts are bad, and that's okay. You just do another attempt. And whether it's just the chance of enough attempts leads to a few things clicking, or if it's by you learning from mistakes, sooner or later I find that I get unstuck. The other final thing though is if you have done a couple of rewrites and it feels like each rewrite is just a clone of the previous one, like you're stuck in a rut, then the final step is to work on something else. Like just find a different project to be on for some time. Come back to it in 3 to 6 months and see if your head is clearer. That's not cool. So the sub count is showing something went wrong in the construction of the proto actually. So let's go back. Farmer party is fine, but the farmer is messed up. Three hearts, one strength. Now, proto from literal. So we're getting two. I ID here is not 0, but nobody incremented the index. All right, so that looks like the simulation is working. I can see hearts and strength all looking like it used to. Now, to talk about the question of testing again, if I was a little bit further along with this system, what I could have done is so this is a random system. So in the process of testing things like this, I've now switched from having hearts and strength being integers that just sit on the entities to being counters that live inside this tile system that are then attached to entities. So it's a little bit more indirect, but the point of doing it is to get everything into this uniform tile language that I'm trying to push for. The thing I could have done is I could have created a little fingerprint or thumbprint of this particular simulation by looking at something like the probabilities, right? Run 10,000 copies of the simulation before the change and count how many times there were 4 characters left, 3 characters left, 2 characters left, something like that. Some kind of distillation of the process into a small fingerprint that I could then make a little chart or list of numbers about or whatever. And then make the change, get the fingerprint again, and compare them. If the fingerprints are the same, then I'm basically saying that I've captured the main thing that I want to stay the same. Testing that kind of thing over randomness, since I'm using randomness to determine what happens within each simulation, can be a little trickier than deterministic testing. But there are ways to do it if you go statistical on it. You just want to start looking at the distributions of outcomes to make sure that you're not changing anything logically. Okay, so I've got everything phrased as a tile count instead of as a tile counter instead of as directly coded integer. The only thing that's not actually fit in here is when, where is the I think it's here. I need to get the tile, the character stuff all in one spot. I got these, like all the sim entity stuff should probably be organized carefully next. But before we go there, let's do quick look. Yeah, so this is saying when the counter gets to 0, we discard the tile. We actually want to be just a little bit more careful than that. We want to go RPG proto, tile proto equals RPG proto from ID, context proto ID. Now, if the tile proto kind is proto kind tile, that should be that, like that's more of an assert, honestly. But if that then says that the tile discard on 0, then we apply this logic. Otherwise, we just let it stay at 0, but keep the tile in place. that shouldn't change anything. Okay. So the next step would be to get to the point where something like taunt could be real. I think we were going to do, I mean, blast is a checkable. We're going to do protect. That's the one that's very doable at this level. Protect. Do not discard on 0, max of 1. Protected. We do discard this on 0, and you can have protected is kind of like poison or sleep. It's like a status effect. And so then what we want to do is we want to add wizard party. And we want to test the wizard party against the goblin party. Now I can't see which one's the wizard in this. So let me go figure out why that is. When I'm logging the combat, it's not there. It's in context then. Log a character. Right, so then after doing those two, I guess the rest we want to do as a loop. So RPG sim entity node tile entity. This is actually character. First child. If tile proto ID equals heart ID, or tile proto ID equals attack ID, then do nothing. Otherwise, why don't we clean that up by saying if it is not one of those? Okay. Heart ID, attack ID. So it's not one of those. Then what we'll do is we'll print to the log space, a number, and a tile name. I want to deal with this a little differently, but I haven't got there yet. So the count is the tile counter, and the name comes from the proto tile name. In order to get to the proto, we need to do RPG proto equals RPG proto from ID, context, tile proto ID. Whoops. There we go. Protect, protect, protect. All right. I'm going to, let's take a look. 2 hours and a half. I'm going to take a 30-minute to an hour break and sign off for a bit, and I'll be back later today. Maybe a couple hours, actually. I might be off for a couple hours. But I'll try to stream at least a little bit in the later afternoon, early evening time today as well. All right? So I'll see y'all a little later. Bye-bye.